Hello everyone, my name is Aliaksandr Piahanau and I am a researcher at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, where I investigate the history of diplomacy, energy and violence. In this video I will present to you my most recent research. This research was just published as an article in the international academic journal Diplomacy and Statecraft. This article tells an incredible story of how energy scarcity shaped the borders of Hungary after the First World War. Hungary is my favorite case study, but have you ever visited its capital, Bucharest? Just kidding, of course, Budapest. But let's talk about a different time in Budapest, the spring of 1920. It wasn't the best time to be there. Pogroms and Spanish flu were rampant, and people were hiding in dark buildings and cold wagons. Not exactly a fun time. Now, picture this. In the midst of all this chaos, the Hungarian government had to decide who would go to Paris to sign an important international agreement. No one wanted to go. Really, who would want to leave this mess and have a little distraction in Paris, right? One minister even said, "My father would not forgive me such a shame." Eventually, Foreign Minister Pal Teleki volunteered to go, but his colleagues preferred that he stay home. It was rumored that Teleki had planned to shoot himself after signing the treaty in Paris. In the end, two minor representatives went to France. They signed this controversial agreement on 4 June 1920 and then lived long lives. It became known as the Treaty of Trianon. It restored peace between Hungary, a former ally of the defeated Germany, and the victorious Entente powers after the First World War, the war that Hungary lost. You might be wondering why it was so difficult to decide who should sign the Peace Treaty of Trianon. You will find it out in a moment. But what is even more surprising that even today, 100 years later, the Peace of Trianon still matters. One thing is that the Trianon remains a part of everyday life in 8 Central European countries. Many people, especially in Hungary, think it was wrong and unjust. Compared to its pre-war size, Hungary became 3 times smaller in area and population. Most of its former provinces joined the neighboring enemy states, allies of the Entente. The newly proclaimed Czechoslovakia attached northern Hungary. An equally new Yugoslavia took southern Hungary, and Transylvania in the east became part of Romania. A quarter of the population of the separated territories, over 3 million people, were ethnic Hungarians or Magyars. Many of them later faced repression and discrimination. On the day peace was signed, 4 June 1920, crowds in Budapest protested against splitting of the homeland and of the Magyar nation. In the years that followed, the Hungarian government began to criticize the Treaty of Trianon, particularly its clauses on the borders. While Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia were dissolved in the 1990s, Hungary continues to exist within its Trianon boundaries. Its semi-authoritarian government, led by Viktor Orban, often refers to the Trianon peace as a national trauma and a peace dictate. When Orban came to power in 2010, I was living in Budapest and I couldn't believe how often Orban raised this issue. He used the Trianon discourse as one of his main propaganda tools. Orban appealed to a sense of Magyar national greatness, but also to anger and mistrust of the outside world. Orban hasn't changed since then. No, I don't mean that he hasn't got any gray hairs, but his obsession with the Trianon remains. I think because it has proved its mobilizing power. Orban's party Fidesz won 4 consecutive elections in Hungary since 2010. In 2020, on the centenary of the Trianon, a huge memorial was inaugurated in front of the parliament in Budapest. It contains the names of 13,000 settlements that Hungary had before the First World War. This memorial conveys a great sense of loss that Hungarians still associate with the Trianon. But here is a question. Can you imagine that Hungarians could feel happy about the Trianon Treaty back in 1920? It sounds provocative, but let me explain. A few years ago, I visited the French diplomatic archives in the suburbs of Paris, where I was struck by a confidential report written in Budapest in the spring of 1921. Its author, the French diplomat Maurice Fouché, noted that the Hungarian public was extremely happy to learn that the Trianon peace would soon come into force. The treaty was signed, let's not forget, on 4 June 1920, but it did not become legally binding until a year later on 26 July 1921. According to Fouché, this was exactly what the Hungarians had been waiting for. Actually, 26 July 1921 should be remembered as the date when Greater Hungary ceased to exist as a legal entity. Once again, 26 July 1921, when the treaty entered into force, and not 4 June 1920 when it was signed. But who cares about such legal details? Anyway, Fouché surprised me. How could the Hungarians be pleased with the Trianon? And that led me to another question. If the terms of Trianon were so unfavorable, why did the government sign the treaty? Again, the primary sources helped me to understand the Hungarian statesman better. The official journal of the Hungarian peace delegation to the Versailles Conference proved particularly informative. The task of this delegation was to weigh all the pros and cons of the peace deal proposed by the Entente. Its members emphasized that the treaty as it stood would have limited territorial implications for the Hungarian state. The reason was that there was a profound difference between de facto and de jure Hungary. Legally, on paper, Hungary existed in its vast historical size with 20 million subjects, but de facto, Budapest had already lost control of most of them a year earlier. In 1920, Budapest could barely manage a population of 7 million. Hungary was short of food and fuel and was suffering from a blockade imposed by its neighbors and the Entente. The diplomats hoped that by signing the peace treaty, post-war Hungary would resume trade and improve its disastrous situation, and it actually worked. In the 6 years following the Treaty of Trianon, Hungarian imports tripled. But who cares about these boring details of trade and law? We should, because the simple interpretation of the Treaty of Trianon emphasizes how it radically changed the de jure size of Hungary, and that is very misleading. According to the treaty, Budapest was to cede only a narrow strip of territory, shown in yellow, to Austria. But before doing so, Hungary secured the evacuation of Romanian and Yugoslav armies from some of the eastern and southern regions, marked in blue. The withdrawal of Yugoslav troops from the mining town of Pécs in 1921, marked with a yellow star, was of great importance. While the country was struggling with an energy shortage, this area produced best hard coal in Hungary. Access to the Pécs mines improved the national energy balance. In one sense, the Treaty of Trianon increased the area under Budapest control, but it also promised vital fossil fuels. Indeed, the importance of coal has long been overlooked by the historians of Trianon, and it's a pity because the issues of peace, borders, and energy were already closely linked at the beginning of the 20th century. Let's see how important they were for each other. What can you say from this graph? One thing is that Europe was heavily dependent on coal from the end of the 19th to the middle of the 20th century. Hungary was no exception. This fossil fuel was even more important than oil is today. In fact, coal supplied almost 80% of Europe's energy needs at the beginning of the 20th century, far more than oil's current share of around 30%. It provided fuel for everything from factories and trains to heating and cooking at home. Modern life completely relied on it. Second, just like oil today, coal had a huge impact on international relations. Take a look at this map. It shows coal deposits in Europe before the First World War. However, what is not evident is that not all mining areas were equally productive. Not all were able to provide energy self-sufficiency for their countries. In fact, most European nations at the time were dependent on imports of foreign coal. There were three main coal exporters: Britain, West Germany, and Silesia, shown in dark blue, which is now divided between Poland and Czechia. Now we go for the third point, which is important to remember for our topic. The Czechs, in green, controlled South Silesia and were the largest supplier of coal to Hungary. They were fortunately neighbors, but there was a downside. The Czechs wanted to take away from Hungary its northern regions, where the Slovaks lived, with whom they wanted to create a single Czechoslovak republic. As you can see, without the Slovaks, it would make no sense for the Czechs to call their state Czechoslovakia. Now, to foresee the future drama between Budapest and Prague, please take a look at another map. It shows how Austria-Hungary was replaced by new states after the First World War. Consider two perspectives. On the one hand, Hungary ruled Slovakia, surrounded by yellow, and needed coal from Prague. On the other hand, Prague had coal but wanted to rule Slovakia. This created the potential for conflict, but also for compromise. Let's zoom what happened next. First, in November 1980, the Czechs stopped supplying coal to Hungary, and without Czech coal, things got pretty bad in Hungary. One Hungarian politician summed up the solution to the crisis in these words: every wagon of coal must be paid for with territorial concessions. So Budapest withdrew its troops from Slovakia in December 1918. Then the Czechs occupied, but they did not send coal to Hungary, not immediately. Prague preferred to wait until Budapest was exhausted and began to appreciate the importance of coal. Indeed, the coal shock in Hungary led to massive unemployment, social unrest, and the threat of famine. People, including children, were forced to burn anything instead of coal. After 2 years of energy crisis, Budapest was offered the chance to sign the Treaty of Trianon, and it did not refuse. Why? You remember how peace process contributed to the de facto expansion of Hungary's territory. But add to that the Entente leaders who drafted the treaty wanted the Czechs, the Hungarians, and other neighboring people to find a compromise and stop disturbing the peace in Central Europe. In addition to new borders and other matters, they included a clause about coal in the treaty. Hungary was promised coal supplies from Czechoslovakia, but also from Poland, and the preservation of its main coal mines at Pécs in the south and at Salgótarján in the north, which had previously been occupied by the Czechs. And that was a big deal. So my version is that the little joy of the Treaty of Trianon in Budapest was actually warmed by coal and the expectation of economic recovery. After studying the archives and discussing this topic with other historians, I summed it up in a long article for Diplomacy and Statecraft. Now you can better understand its title. But if you are not up for some heavy readings, there is a shorter version in the International Encyclopedia of the First World War. So, what is the takeaway from all this? Well, first, seeing the past through the perspective of victim does not help a lot. Second, it is important to remember how connected the world is, especially regarding energy and politics. The need for coal brought countries together and drove them apart. Such cooperation not only appeased the border tensions between Hungary and Czechoslovakia, but contributed to making Czechoslovakia the main trading partner of Hungary in the decade following the Trianon Peace. But you can think wider and wonder how energy interdependence helped overcoming much more complex antagonisms. Take the example of Western Europe. After fighting the two world wars, its six nations formed the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, the forerunner of the today European Union. So next time you hear about a treaty or international agreement, think about the resources that are at stake. Or when you turn on the light at home, ask yourself where this energy comes from. It might just give you a new perspective on the wild thing. And who knows, maybe you will even appreciate coal a little more, or maybe not. It isn't the most eco-friendly resource, but it sure did help bring peace to Europe. And the last point, do you want to know what happened to that foreign minister, Pal Teleki, who didn't go to Paris to sign the Trianon in 1920? Well, he got a promotion. 1 month after the signing of Trianon, Teleki became prime minister, and it seems that he began to appreciate the terms of the Peace of Trianon more. When Parliament debated the treaty in the autumn, Teleki suggested that the deputies should think about it with their brains rather than their hearts. It must have been a deadly persuasive argument because 3/4 of the deputies voted to ratify the Trianon Peace. But of course, it isn't easy to approach problems rationally. Emotions and self-esteem are parts of our decision making. Spring 1941, Teleki was prime minister again. On 3rd April, after he learned that Hungary had joined Germany in its invasion of Yugoslavia to regain its former southern territory, he shot himself. In his farewell letter, Teleki wrote that by breaking its word, the nation has thrown away its honor. That case makes even more evident how controversial is the Trianon legacy in Hungary. For me, the Trianon question is still a kind of mystery, but the energy perspective made it a bit clearer. And what about you? Do you think that the Trianon peace brought any good to Hungarians and other Central Europeans? How can we measure or assess such dramatic events? Or how should we talk about them? And what role empathy, respect, and humor might play in such discussions? Leave your comment below. In the meantime, thanks for watching, treat problems with humor, and goodbye.